would probably take an average 1-2 grinder playing his A game over an average 25-50 grinder playing his C game any day.
You're listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. Each week, you'll get to peek inside the greatest minds in the game and discover what makes them successful.
Mental toughness separates those that can't handle the stress.
If you're going to treat it like an amateur, you're probably going to have amateur results.
Here are your hosts, Elliot Rowe and Adrian Talenchik Rousum.
So, welcome to the show this week. We've got a fun guest. We've got Jared Tendler, another mindset coach coming on. He's the author of a couple of books, Mental Game of Poker 1 and 2, and he's going to be talking about mindset and what he's done in his career. So, Adrian, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm really excited, but I've been having a lot of fun this week following the WSOP action, and as the main event filters down to its top, I don't know, I think they're down to getting close to the final table now. Are they at the final table?
Yeah, just final table. 2 days time. They're on their break. So we'll see how that goes. And some exciting news from this side. Sort of clients have had a great week, and guys who've been on the show. Matt Berkey, who you guys remember we interviewed recently, got third in the 1-for-1 drop for $240,000. And Fedor just won another high roller, which seems to be his job. And he just won one of those over in Montenegro as well for 3.5 million Hong Kong dollars. So another great week for mindset work.
No big deal.
No big deal. Okay, so let's give Jared a call.
Today we have the one, the only Jared Tendler on the show. He is a mental game coach for many, many poker players, many successful poker players, and also the author of The Mental Game of Poker. So welcome, Jared. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Adrian. And Elliot, great to be here, guys.
Thanks for coming on the show. And if start us from the beginning, how did you find poker from mindset side and then get into becoming an author in the subject as well?
Very randomly. I mean, I played poker as a kid. Summertime we'd go play golf, playing setback and AC-Deucey and fun games like that. But other than playing poker at my bachelor party and college buddies, my poker experience was very, very limited until I met a former professional golfer on the golf course who had turned into a professional poker player. And at the time, he was attempting to achieve Supernova Elite. So this is basically kind of the summer-ish, late summer, early fall, 2007. I think it was the first year of Supernova Elite. He was trying to do it in 10 months with massive challenge just to do it in 12. And was having just kind of like major tilt issues. And, on the course, we were just kind of talking about what I do and how it might be applicable to him. And a couple months later, he contacted me and did some work, some coaching sessions, and, the results were great. Tilt, for the most part, gone, at least not in the way that it was going to affect his computer equipment. I think he essentially paid for our sessions, savings of mice and monitors and keyboards that I actually did see at one point the pile. Tilt was pretty much gone, had success, made a lot of money, and was part owners in Stox Poker. For those that don't remember, essentially acquired by Card Runners, was one of the early training sites that existed around then, the early days of training sites. And at that point, there was no one producing kind of like mental game content. So he invited me to participate, and realizing that this was probably an audience that I wasn't going to be able to bullshit, rather than kind of jumping into, hey, here's a bunch of advice. I did, hey, here's my system that I've used with golfers. Maybe it will apply to poker. And that kind of gave me like a little bit of lead time to just kind of get in the forums and just start having conversations with players and really kind of understanding the nuances of what their day-to-day careers were like and what the game was really like at that level. Kind of a full-on just kind of dive deep into the game. Gave away a ton of my time with questions, doing kind of free coaching sessions and kind of a guerrilla way of learning. And it was great. I mean, it was a huge community who was kind of like rallying around kind of what I was trying to offer. And that was very different than what my experience was like in golf, which to me was kind of ironic because I knew golf incredibly well, but it was a really competitive market. Golfers still are not necessarily convinced of how important that was, or at least they weren't 12 years ago. And so it was just a very difficult market to break into. Poker, ironically, wasn't. Yeah, but roughly about a year plus in, I realized that writing a book was an option. I'd read the books that were out there, and I think they were good, for their time. They reminded me a lot of the golf books and certainly were helpful, but I knew that there was something deeper that I could offer, and the idea of writing a book started to kind of pop up, and my overconfidence kind of showed. I thought that I was a writer. I thought that I could write it on my own, and after spending 6 months of basically going around in circles, I was randomly able to Barry Carter, who was at the time was a writer for Poker News, and he did a series of articles where I basically gave him free coaching sessions, and he kind of did a write-up about each one. So it was great promotion for me. He got his head cleared out, and but we sort of established a friendship, and at that point, gone around in circles too many times to count. We decided to partner, and at that point, I think it took about a year and a half to get the thing off the ground, and we launched it the day before Black Friday.
Oh my word!
A little bit of variance. Yeah, that was amazing. So I literally, it was Thursday, and I built a website, taking orders, and it was awesome. PayPal in my email, just kind of like rolling down all these sales. I think I sold like 180 books on Cloud9. Next morning, same deal. And then I was in a coaching session, and got done with it, and of course, like my Skype had blown up, and had I heard, and of course, then I look at my email, and there's like there hadn't been a single book sale for like 2 hours. Oh, that was fun.
Oh my gosh. You definitely need to have your own mental game intact when that happens.
Yeah, no, and overconfidence was definitely an issue for me. The way it showed up in this was I basically thought like, oh, you write a book and then it'll just sell. Like it's kind of like a if you build it, they will come kind of mentality. And it was like basically my oh shit moment was like, wow, like I'm gonna have to like really sell this thing and like really work hard at like marketing and promoting it. And like there's this whole other thing that goes into a book that I considered. I wasn't like completely oblivious, but obviously there wasn't any selling that day or really for the first couple.
And I mean, you're mentioning PayPal. Did you choose to self-publish rather than go through a publisher?
I did, yeah. Basically kind of did the calculation, and my break-even point was about 1,300 bucks. Big investment up front, but I'm confident in my ability to at least break even. And then it was just kind of like off and running. And the economics for a publishing deal is really, really bad. I don't know exactly what it is in poker. Maybe it's a little bit better than other industries, but the authors.
I really don't think it is. I mean, I've heard some pretty bad ones over the years.
So yeah, I self-published it. I looked at it like I was kind of starting another business, like a publishing kind of arm of my operations. And yeah, it's been. I know a lot about the publishing industry now. Certainly far more than I ever thought I would, but being able to control my content and obviously reap the rewards.
I mean, one of the things I find quite interesting, I started working in the industry in about 2011, and there's definitely been some big shifts in the sort of issues that people come to me now with versus the issues back in 2011. A bit like you mentioned with the smashing up of computer equipment. That seems to come up far less now than it used to, sort of back in those days. When you're talking about, even earlier before then, what sort of shift have you seen in the mindset issues since, 2008, 2009?
It's funny you say that because I actually have seen, like back in 2008, like it was somewhat scoffed at. Like scoffing is probably the nicest word I could laughed at, ridiculed, just for the idea of like saying, hey, spend 5 minutes before you play and warm up. So the mindset issues that existed back then were a complete lack of awareness for the emotions that affect decision making, a complete lack of desire to do and put in what I think we would now consider to be a very like minimal level of effort towards work ethic and study habits and like professionalism. Poker players back then were motivated. But in every sense of the word, they were pretty much a big hot mess. And so there wasn't really like, I'm not saying everybody was, obviously, but I think the people that weren't were the ones that came into poker already having like a pretty solid, mental state. But the people that like hated losing at everything that they did prior to poker probably just hated it even more because there was less control than the other thing. So it basically kind of ran the gamut of everything you can imagine, but just amplified to a level that was now what we would consider to be.
And interesting to hear you're noticing exactly the same thing I am, that now it seems to be more fine-tuning mental game, improving focus than the sort of the huge issues that, like you described before. So same thing with your clients there?
Yeah, and also, I'll get like the players that will come to me now will have had some improvements. What we're finding is like some deeper personal issues, kind of rumbling through, which I know the surface level is like, hey, I'm not as confident as I deserve to be or think I should be, or, I'm still getting pissed off at these regulars who are, hyper aggressive and, making just tons of bad mistakes, but I can't seem to control it. I know it. I've made some improvement, but I'm not where I want to be. And so some of it is, they've attempted to gain control either through my book or through other resources, and they've made, that's led to the improvements. But there was either something that they weren't aware of, which I think is certainly you and I bring to the table as coaches. We're helping players to remove things from their mind about like what problems could be. Like we're basically like filtering out information, getting them focused on the things that matter. And so that's a hard thing to do if you're unskilled, in the mental game, to be able to kind of self-diagnose and be able to determine the strategies that are best for you. It can often be so.
Yeah, I think it's almost impossible for most people to self-diagnose, especially if it's very deep subconscious stuff, triggers coming from childhood or the way they've been brought up or teenage years. It can be quite difficult to make the connections, but very obvious once those connections have been made.
One of the things that I find, I still feel and hear some hesitancy to acknowledge the importance of mental game in the community. And one of the comments I often get is that people will say, well, even when I'm tilted or mad, it doesn't show up in my game. How do you respond if somebody, comes to you with that kind of approach?
It depends. Like a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I will often play along for a little bit, find ways in which it is affecting them. There's only so much you can do to like kind of awaken somebody. When people come to me, they've already sort of raised their hand and said like, yes, like I'm aware there's a problem. I'm willing to work on it. I'm willing to pay for it. And I want you to help dig through and figure out how to do it, even though I may kind of kick and scream at certain and be resistant. I think one of the things I've worked really hard to do is to find ways around people's sort of natural defenses. And so that means that I'm not necessarily kind of like out there, like kind of calling out, those, that the person you're describing or the ethic or the ethos in the community of that sort of, well, it doesn't really affect my game. There's only so much you can do to kind of help people to wake up. But they have to want it. And sometimes that means that they either have to hit rock bottom, they have to be on their way out. That's sort of too often kind of the sad case that players aren't awakened to the realities of how tilt is affecting their game until they are behind the curve and they're really struggling. I mean, the number of times I've had conversations with players who are just committed to this belief that they're just running bad is too hard to count. And I'm not saying that running bad doesn't happen, and I'm not saying that people are going to be far more likely to come to me when they are running bad. But to use that as this narrative that kind of protects them from admitting that maybe they have fallen behind the curve, dangerous for them, but it's oftentimes very functional because they're just protecting their confidence. They're protecting themselves from admitting that they have fallen short or that they're failing, which ironically is the thing that's most likely to help them to start succeeding again, is actually kind of a cold dose of reality. But there are lots of players out there, lots of people out there who don't either have the confidence to be able to have that admission, or they don't have the people around them to be able to support them and to help them, either realize that or help them to kind of deal with that failure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's worth pointing out. A lot of guys I'll have the same thing said to me. And they'll say, well, my friends say that I'm playing fine. I highly recommend that you speak to a technical coach who's not your friend if you think tilt isn't affecting your game and it's just bad variance. Because oftentimes your friends don't necessarily want to be very critical of your game because they might not be comfortable being critical. So speak to someone who's completely neutral to look at your game if you're unsure, rather than only your friends, because there might be a little bit of a conflict of interest there.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that isolation is a dangerous thing. There's got to be that desire to kind of want to have your world be awakened a little bit. It's like Neo choosing the blue pill instead of the red pill. You got to want to be alerted to that stuff. And I think what may be helpful to people who are listening to this that may camp is that very often the thing that you fear or worry about is not now. not saying it's not going to be fun. It's going to be fun, but the more that you can embrace the ways that you suck, the easier it is to suck less.
Yeah, it's as you say, facing the truth, not necessarily fun, but certainly profitable. And the other part of it with poker is even if you don't want to face reality, at some point the game will force you to face reality with the way you'll be punished if you do fall too far behind the curve. So it's better off, if you're out there and you're listening to this and any of it's resonating, take it into account. Try and be as honest with yourself as possible. And as I say, try and get some of those outside opinions because it really does make a huge difference. So Jared, you spent a few days in Vegas. Tell us how it went.
Yeah, it was great. I hadn't been there for a couple of years. Life happened. My wife and I buying a house, moving out of New York City, and joining the suburban life, and obviously having a kid too, 3-year-old. So it was good to be back. Very, very quick trip. Flew in Friday morning, left on the red eye Sunday night. Ton of sessions, a bunch of interviews, bumping into old friends, seeing clients that I'd never met in person. A big mixed bag, but it was a lot of fun to be back, and and it was also cool to sort of see the new kind of setup, wherever the mothership is now.
Yeah, they switched across, didn't they?
Yeah. It was nice that it was kind of like just a more kind of intimate space rather than sort of the sprawling in with everything else going. It was cool. Like the setup was great, and all in all was a fun trip. I know you were out there as well.
Yeah, I did a couple of days, a few days after you left, I think, and my trip sounds almost identical to yours, to be honest. I think we're living some sort of strange parallel life. But yeah, it's a lot of fun catching up with clients and doing sessions, and as I say, putting names to faces, people who in a lot of cases I may have been speaking to for a few years and live in various parts of the world, and it's really nice to, shake some hands and see who it is I've been speaking to. So it's a lot of fun, and but I'm quite relieved I don't have to do a 6-week stint in Vegas, though, to be absolutely honest. The small trips are a lot of fun, but it's pretty hot out there. I'm glad we've now moved to Salt Lake.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
2.5 weeks was my longest trip out there, and I wouldn't say that it almost killed me, but it took me a long time to recover.
With the players that you're coaching when you're there live, I assume a lot of them are going to be online grinders that are playing in some of their, possibly first live series. Are there common things that they have to deal with when it comes to managing their mental game?
Well, the players that I saw this last trip actually were a lot of the live. Some of them were new clients of mine, but they play the live circuit or certainly have a much bigger split. But for the new online grinder to a live tournament sort of scene, it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, if it's a player who is not necessarily the most social, some players they tend to gravitate to online poker because of either some social anxiety or sort of social awkwardness that makes them uncomfortable in those settings. It can be a bit more of a challenge. Feel space and kind of know some of the norms and kind of what to expect. And for players who are not of that category, there's still just this sort of the mechanics of actually like having to count the pot and having to, count out your chips and making sure that you're following the action. So, a lot of the tips I gave players there is just, play some small events and just kind of get more comfortable in the mechanics of the live scene, not to mention the actual decision-making process. But, a big thing too is focusing. And that's, I think, become, an epidemic of sorts, really. It's great when I see poker players reading my book, but, it's half tilting when I see them doing it while they're playing. There's no doubt that live poker is more of a grind. There's kind of less data flow coming in. You're not playing, 8 to 12 tournaments at once or even more. You're playing one. But how you're able to kind of manage that data and manage your interest level, is something that both is trained and also from a commitment, desire, motivation, want to actually fully engage or engage as much as you can in kind of what's happening around you. And, there's definitely a endurance effect or a training effect that occurs even for players who are used to playing 12, 14-hour sessions online. It's a different kind of data set that you're paying attention to. It's not the kind of heavy grind of decision-making. It's much more about observation and being able to absorb the details around you. And so there's a huge learning curve when it comes to that sort of information. And some players can be a bit more aggressive than they need to be about live tells or trying to minimize their own and kind of going on the default, like certainly early on, to just not necessarily worry about forcing either of those things, getting confirmation, that somebody is picking up on tells of yours or testing out some of your own, but not being kind of fully too aggressive in assuming the ones that you're picking up are spot on.
Do you think there's a big difference in the mental game requirements for a player who's playing online versus a player that's playing live?
It can depend on the person, right? So some players may have greater difficulty playing live than they will online. Sometimes that's due to skill, like the players that have less skill sometimes will have greater mental game issues, but sometimes actually having more skill creates greater mental issues because they have greater expectations. But in terms of just sort of like the overall scope, I mean, the way that I would distinguish, live from online would be somewhat no different between playing poker and playing golf, or being a day trader, or, really any other like highly competitive entity. Mental game issues are going to come out. It's really just sort of the circumstances and the way that they come out that differs. The way in which they come out for each individual person is really where it kind of matters most. So I don't think there's a huge difference from a deeper perspective about the types of mental issues that are going to come up, either live or on live. It's just kind of the circumstances and kind of how they'll come out.
And interesting from that side, because you like myself, you work in other areas as well. Have you noticed parallels as you work in the different sports or businesses with poker and the way people are struggling with their mindset?
Yeah, it's all the same stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, we're people first, and the way that we're wired as animals, just doesn't vary that greatly. Period. So then, when you take highly competitive people or just people in general, and have them competing, the ways in which their emotions are going to be affected are going to be very, very similar. So you're going to have confidence issues, you're going to have motivational issues, you're going to have anger issues and anxiety issues. There's an importance and need for focus, learning, and the ways in which you can learn efficiently. I mean, decision making is probably the one thing that is kind of a differentiator in poker, but it's not a differentiator entirely, because if you think about other kind of mental sports or mental competitive arenas, like esports, for example, professional video game players or professional day traders, chess players, the decision making process to me is kind of equal to the physical component of, say, swinging a golf club, or fighting, or swinging a tennis racket, playing football. I mean, there's a honing and a training that is required to get your body to move in the right way to compete. And that same sort of mechanism exists within poker and other kind of mental activities in a way that I would call much more of like sort of like the technique of actually making a decision, not even kind of touching the knowledge base with which that player is drawing from to be able to make a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen virtually identical issues come up in day trading, poker, and even UFC. I mean, it's quite bizarre how close a lot of the issues can be. So yeah, agree with you completely there. And Jared, if someone wants to find out about your material, your books, or book sessions with you, how would they go about doing that?
JaredTendlerPoker.com or JaredTendler.com. The books are pretty much everywhere books are sold. The offer is still available. You can still get a free audio copy of The Mental Game of Poker, actually one or two, kind of your choice. And there's information on that at JaredTendlerPoker.com/free.
Perfect. So go get your free audiobook from Jared. Thank you so much for coming on. Really interested to hear from someone else in the same industry as well. And I hope all of the listeners, found it useful information.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It is remarkable how similar our career paths have been.
Yeah, it's quite hilarious. Well, have a great year, and I'm sure we'll have you on again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you.
So really interesting to have Jared on the show. It's fun from my side. Our careers have a lot of similarities in the way that they've progressed, and always good to hear another side of what another professional thinks.
Yeah, I love all the parallels that happen between poker and all sorts of sports. And even, with Kevin Martin in the Big Brother house, like poker has so many skills that are applicable in everyday life. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only are the skills applicable, but also the emotional strength really shows in different things as well. I'm not surprised we see professional athletes having success at the poker table. In certain situations, people who are former golfers, former footballers, things like that, because that mental toughness really does have value, and that's something that you can definitely transfer to real life from your poker game. So, Adrian, where can people find you?
I'm hanging out on Twitch, twitch.tv/talentchick. Right now, just grinding through the end stages of the Micro Millions. It ends at the end of July, but looking forward to hanging out there and seeing you all there.
And if you want to check out my stuff, check out pokermindcoach.com. And you can also check out my academy, pokermindcoachacademy.com, if you're looking for webinars and my MP3s and all you need mindset-wise. So we shall talk to you soon.
Have a good week.
You've been listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. To get future episodes delivered to you automatically, make sure to subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting service. To get any resources mentioned in the episode or to listen to past shows, visit pokermindcoach.com/TMA podcast. Thanks for listening.